Self-inquiry pointers. When you're working with self-inquiry, which usually means you're working toward that first big shift in identity, there are a lot of nuances that come into play that can be important and can significantly change the quality of your practice. So I want to point out a few places that I think people get stuck. One is, you've read about the doctrine of no self in Buddhism and believe that self-inquiry is a way of eradicating the self or finding out clearly that there is no self or convincing yourself that there's no self. This is not the point of self-inquiry at all. The deeper teachings of anatta in Buddhism don't necessarily relate to this first shift and trying to find something in your experience that is as subtle as the realization of no self is just going to be frustrating. So the first step, the first movement in realization is often experientially quite the opposite of no self. In fact, after that first awakening, it often culminates in this experience of indescribably obvious, more real than real sense of I. You could call this sense of self with a big S. An absurdly obvious knowing that I am. And nothing disturbs that knowing. It's a deep peace when this is realized, a deep relaxation and release. Because where are you going to go? What is there but I? What needs to be found to prove that I? Nothing. What is it that we could think or experience that could threaten that I? Nothing. It's just so obvious, so clear, so pristinely relaxing. That often is the result of the first shift or first awakening, or some version or form of that. So we're not looking for an experience of no self when we're self-inquiring. We're actually looking for the location of the sense of you, being you, just as you are, before you think anything about yourself, before you look outward into thoughts and start manipulating thought objects or believing thoughts or believing things about yourself. What is it that's doing that? Trace it back to the root or the source, the purest sense of I. That's why it's often described as I am, because it's I am ... I am before I am has believed itself to become something or subjectified itself with a thought object, creating that sense of duality inside consciousness. So it's a matter of looking for the self, but being honest about what is thought. So the thought, me, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a spiritual practitioner, all of those are thoughts. It's important to recognize that, because that, by definition, is not I am. That's something that the sense of I am becomes apparently aware of. But it doesn't define who you are, right? Because who you are is still there, whether or not that thought is there. So for instance, you could have a thought right now that says, I'm looking for the sense of I and I can't find it. Okay, that's a thought. But there's something aware of that. You. Something very much awake, alert, and actually completely still, that's aware of that thought. But here's the thing. 10 minutes ago, that thought wasn't there. 2 hours ago, that thought wasn't there. But you were still here, obviously. The sense of you is not contingent upon thoughts. It's not contingent upon practices. It's not contingent upon inquiry. So what's the point of doing inquiry? Well, we're so used to overlooking this sense of I by binding our attention into thought objects, a sort of feeling of seeking, right? Seeking what we want, what we think we need, seeking respite or peace, seeking understanding. And all of that continues to pull attention into a sort of outward confirmation. Feels like we're trying to move outward or grasp outwardly at something. And we do this so frequently, we forget where that's all originating, where the grasping is arising from, where the awareness of thoughts is arising from, where the seeking seems to be rooted. Like, who's doing the seeking? Who's aware of the seeking thoughts? Who's noticing the thought display? That's the key. Not who's noticing the thoughts and then thinking about that some more, because that's more thoughts. Who's noticing those ones? Who is sitting right where you are? Who is looking, hearing, seeing? What's looking through those eyes right now? Now you understand, if you think about the answer to that, that's not what's looking through those eyes. That's not what's thinking those thoughts. Moreover, the feeling that you're even thinking those thoughts is a bit of an error, because the thoughts really just come and go. They're innocent. But I'm using that language to lead you back into the pure sense. So, looking for the sense of self is a strange thing, because you're never really gonna find it. What you can find by exhausting the looking through discarding all thought objects, including the ones that seem like they're about I or me or my story or my past or my future, what you find is that you've never left the self. The one that's looking, the one that's out there inquiring, the one that's reaching out seemingly into consciousness, into what seems like the world, trying to find its way, trying to figure things out. That is a produced sense of self. You could call it maybe the small self, small s self. But the big S self is just there the whole time, sort of watching it all happen. But it's not really watching it from a distance either, because it's part of the whole thing. The whole thing, the whole apparatus of thinking, thought, consciousness, rest from consciousness, is all just you. It doesn't touch you in any way that permanently changes what you are. It can't. Because it all really happens inside of you, or inside of what you are. So what you are is completely unaltered, regardless of any thought you've ever had, any belief you've ever had, any belief you've ever let go of. All paradigm shifts have all occurred inside of this space of self, big S self. But they haven't disturbed it one iota. It's not threatenable in that way, because it's primary to all movements in consciousness. It's primary to all beliefs. It accommodates all beliefs easily. It accommodates all thoughts. But those thoughts don't change what you are in the way they seem to. They don't alter what you are. Those beliefs are not about you. They're formed inside of the pure sense of I amness. So I've seen and given many pointers on self-inquiry, and there are many good ones. But it's such a slippery thing to talk about, because the long and short of it is, the one who's doing the inquiry is the one you're looking for. And it is kind of a joke, because often when you come to the end of the looking, meaning you've just exhausted all belief that you can actually find something, that's when it hits you over the head that it could never be other. It's just been there the whole time. But the weird thing is, you kind of have to go through the process usually, because to just believe what I said, that just turns into another thought object. You don't actually realize it in that way by just hearing it, resonating with it, and believing it. You sort of have to exhaust the looking, exhaust the energetic belief that you're going to find a self, a satisfaction in some object of thought. And then, boom, pure subject, pure I, nothing but. Never has been, never can be. There's a great video that's very short, and it shows a woman going through this process who probably had years of preparation and work beforehand, but she may not have. And she's talking to Papaji, who is pretty masterful in the way he directs her to this initial insight, to this initial shift. And the effect of it's very obvious in the video. But you can see how she's processing and how she's perceiving herself initially, and then how he guides her into this ridiculously obvious realization that the self could never be anywhere but here. Just this undeniably obvious purity of I am. So I'll link that video somehow. I'm sure I can figure out a way. I hope this was helpful.